Thank you. Don't be afraid. Or I should say in my native tongue, don't be afraid. He's got a hammer. Is there anybody in the audience who thinks they could come up here and without the hammer, shove this nail through this board? Unless you're a magician and want to trick me or not human, you can't do that. You need the hammer. In fact, we wouldn't even have invented nails if we didn't have these first. And we've had these in some form or another for the history of our species. Some of the oldest artifacts are, in fact, rocks with a groove on them where those things were strapped to a stick. And what these give us, what tools give us, this is about tools. We need privacy tools. What tools give us is what's called agency. I advise you to invest in the meme growing around the word agency. You'll see more of it. The original meaning of agency was the power to act with full effect in the world. It's derived from the Latin word to do, agere. When you have agency, you have the power to act in the world. Now, an interesting thing about human beings, about us, is that alone among all species, we not only have intelligence and walk upright, which is weird for a primate, but we do it, but that our senses spread out through the things that we operate. My senses extend out through this hammer. I have the ability to drive this nail because my senses extend out through this. It's like an extra femur or an extra bone out here. I don't have a sense of heat or cold in it, but it's part of me. It becomes part of me. And we extend ourselves through a process that cognitive linguists call indwelling. That's where our senses dwell in something else. And if you look at the way we use the first person pronoun, my, the first person singular pronoun, it applies to more than just simple tools like a hammer. When we drive a car, our senses extend out through the car. Those are my wheels, my fender, my steering wheel, my windscreen. All those things are part of me. We even if we're just hiring the car, it's ours. We speak of it in the first person possessive. And there are two ways that agency has scale. And scale is a term that it's very popular in Silicon Valley, where I've worked for many years. Businesses want scale. If you have a new business and you go to a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, they're going to ask you, how do you scale up your business? Meaning, how do you achieve a mass market for your business? How do you grow it? But the scale in this sense means that if I run into a hammer anywhere in the world, I know how to use it. Most people do. I was just using one a few days ago on the other side of the world, about 9,000 miles from here, and it worked fine. That's scale. And it's scale not just for me, but it's scale in the social sense, where once these tools are in the world, we know how to use them. They give us a kind of social scale. So let's say that this board here is the internet. And what I want to do is make a connection with a company. Say each of these boards here are a company that I want to connect with. And how do I nail my concerns to each of those separately, or how do I get scale across that? Now, it's important to understand what the internet really is. We've made the internet sort of conceptually this complicated thing. The way the geeks that invented the internet thought of it in the first place, the simple thing that they did was they invented a protocol, the internet protocol. You've seen IP addresses, 198.4.25.6. That's an IP address, an internet address. And what the internet protocol does, it's the simplest possible thing, is say, you're going to connect two ends. We're going to connect this end to that end over there, and we're going to make a best effort, the internet will make a best effort, to move the packets of data from here to there. If I'm addressing data from 205.5.7.21 to 805.6.14.12, then the internet is simply a bunch of routers that say, okay, I've got your packet, I'm going to route it over here like the post office. But it's not looking at what's in there, because that would slow it down. What the creators of the internet did was make a system, or specify a system, that was end-to-end. A guy named David Reed, David Clark, and I think Richard Salser came up with an argument for this that helped them design the net, called the end-to-end arguments in system design. And it said, let's make a network which is nothing but ends, a world of nothing but ends. And because that's there, last week I was able to sit in New York and talk to Sydney and talk to London and San Francisco, all on Skype, all at no cost. Everybody looked great. We could read each other's whiteboards. It was pretty freaking amazing. And we take it for granted. Progress is the process by which the miraculous becomes mundane. And we have that with the internet. It's this amazing thing in our midst. And an interesting thing about it as well is that the geeks who designed the net did not put billing into it. Now, it's okay for those that give us access to the net to bill us for a sum of data or for the access itself. But that doesn't mean that billing is built into it. As a matter of fact, if it had been up to the phone and cable and satellite companies of the world, we never would have had the net. But instead, we have this world of ends, which a friend of mine, Craig Burton, who's responsible for Novell's success back in the 80s, described as a giant zero. He said the best way to describe an end-to-end system in which everybody can see each other across it is as a giant hollow sphere. And you can't add value to the vacuum that's in the middle. It's a giant zero, which, by the way, will be the name of my next book. So this has only been with us for 20 years. The internet we have now, with browsers and email, and especially with ISPs, and commercial activity has only been around since April of 1995. That's when something called the NSF net, National Science Foundation net, one network that carried internet traffic in the US and didn't allow commercial traffic, said, we're going to shut the thing down. Just go ahead and carry on. And that opened up commercial activity. And suddenly ISPs could go into business, Netscape could go into business, Microsoft could compete with Netscape. And Amazon could come into being, eBay came into being, and all heaven broke loose, you might say. That is Eden. It is brand new. In the history of civilization, 20 years is nothing. In the history of business, it's not much longer. What we did was we made Eden, this world of nothing but ends, is like the world was when humans first walked on it. We did not have clothing and shelter yet. And I noticed, by the way, that all of us here are wearing privacy technologies. This is privacy technology. It protects something called our privates, right? Why do we call it that, right? So, and it, not just that, but it gives us warmth, but it also, we use it to conceal things. You know, we conceal the tattoo we didn't like, a little bit of cellulite, a scar, or for guys like me who look like in their second or third trimester, you don't want to show that off, So all of these things are part of why we wear clothing, but we also wear it to express. It is part of this agency thing. It's part of how we interact with the world. We signal each other with our clothing. It's very complicated. It's very subtle, and we take it absolutely for granted. It's unconscious. We may think, oh, gee, I'm going to work this morning. I may wear a coat and a tie, or may dress up, or going out tonight. These are all decisions that we make with privacy in mind. And they're very, very, very well developed in the physical world and not developed at all. Zero. Malcolm did a great job of laying all that out. Hardly at all in the online world. We have very few ways of protecting ourselves there. We are very exposed. So a colleague of mine named Shoshana Zubov, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, in the 1980s wrote a book called In the Age of the Smart Machine. And she created 3 laws, which are still out there. One is everything that can be digitized, I'm going to paraphrase them, anything that can be digitized will be digitized. Everything that can be networked will be networked. And in the absence of any countervailing pressure, that will turn into a big surveillance system. We will be surveilled. It is inevitable that we will be surveilled because there will be a power asymmetry between those that have the big machines and those that don't have the big machines. And Google and Facebook and Amazon and others have giant machines, the biggest computing machines the world has ever seen. And the NSA too in the US, of course. And what are they doing? As Snowden told us, they're following us. And as we know already, they're following us. We look at you look at shoes on website A, and then there's ads for shoes on website B. And that's not going to lessen at all. But it's important in addition to everything that Malcolm just told us, to realize how freaking delusional this is on the part of those that hold this power. They are not connected to us. I don't pay Google anything, and I don't think most of us do. We don't pay Facebook anything. They are a B2B business, both of these things. They're selling, you're the product being sold to the advertisers. Now, this has a weird effect. It means they're not in touch with us. They're not connected with reality. Psychosis is what you have when you're not connected to reality, and they are not. Reality is this. It's the people in this room. It's human beings. It's human nature. It's the human beings saying, I'm going to download advertising and blocking add-ons and extensions more than any other. By far the top browser add-ons and extensions are ad blockers and tracking blockers. From AdBlock Plus, Disconnect, Provoni, there's a whole long list of them. Why is that? Well, we don't like being followed. There are studies done by Customer Commons, which I'm involved with, by Pew, by TrustE, by many others, that show that 90% or more of us, A, don't trust these guys at all, and B, will lie and hide and obscure data about ourselves in order not to be followed, in order not to be understood by these things. Now, this is how far the delusions go. Now, I don't know if you saw this interview several years ago in the US with Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt is a good guy. I know him. He's the chairman of Google. Really nice guy, actually. And he was being interviewed and asked about Google and privacy. And he said, if you're doing something you don't want others to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Basically, if you have something to hide, don't do it. If you think back to 9 months before you were born, there was something to hide without which none of us would be here. None of us would be here if our parents didn't have something to hide. Unless our parents committed a public act, in which case, you know, bravo for you, right? So, an auspicious beginning. But, you know, having a space of our own is as old as being human. We've worn clothing for the duration. We've had clothing and shelter for the duration. And yet, we live in this world at the moment, and it's only a moment, in which those with all the power, or most of the power, say, well, you guys aren't staying in the way of it, and you're getting good things out of it, and you're giving us your data for free, so everything's fair. All's fair in love and data. And it's a weird thing. Again, it's delusional. There's also the fact that it doesn't work very well. This is sort of the thing nobody wants to talk about. It's kind of amazing to me. 1 out of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 is considered a success in the advertising business. That's one delusion. Another is, and they totally excuse the waste. It doesn't matter that this is clogging up the pipes. It doesn't matter that it's annoying a zillion people. It doesn't matter that it's cluttering the world with unnecessary noise. It doesn't matter that almost all, rounds to everything, of the guesses are wrong. When it gets it right, then you have what was called confirmation bias. Yep, that one was a hit. You bought those shoes. That shows the system works. Well, it works for them. It doesn't necessarily work for us because we're the ones standing under this waterfall, this Niagara of assumption about ourselves and of data thrown at us and advertising thrown at us that's mostly irrelevant. I get ads on Facebook, by the way, for under 30 singles. I've been married for a long time. I mean, it's a ludicrous thing. There's another thing. There's a guy named Sean Bohan who works for Mozilla, which makes the Firefox browser, who says that what they're following is not us, but our shadows, our data shadows. It's not the real us, because they don't know us. They don't want to know us. I asked a high up at Google once, why don't you have a call center? Why do you charge for some of this? And he said, we don't want to make less than $1 million per employee. We can only do that if we're an engineering company and we've got this advertising system. That, too, is delusional. What's wrong with having that? Look how much money Apple makes, and you do fabulous customer service. Huge profits. And they're learning from us all the time. Also, what's going on with all of this data collection is that it's ecologically speaking, in the human ecology, in the ecology of the larger world, the physical world we cohabit with this new giant zero virtual one, all this data collection is the computing equivalent of clear-cutting forests. Clear-cutting forests was standard for a very long time until we discovered that, we were out of wood. I mean, England, where the moors are, that got clear-cut. There are no more woods there. We don't know what those woods look like. The only reason it hasn't happened in North America is we have too much of it, finally. But it's the equivalent of clear-cutting, because we realized after a while with clear-cutting, it took forestry like 50 years to figure this out, is that when you clear-cut the whole forest, the entire ecology is gone. And it doesn't just spontaneously come back. We're in the middle of this right now. We're being clear-cut. Our data's being clear-cut. And if it's only up to them, we can't fix it. They're not going to fix it, and the government alone is not going to fix it. Another delusion is that we can be known. There's a myth going on in the big data world, and you'll hear this sometimes if you listen to these guys. We can know you better than you know yourself. Now let me tell you a little bit of background on where the big data conversation came from. Because I've looked at this a little bit. I don't know I'd love to see some real scholarship on this. So this is anecdotal on my part, but I'm pretty sure this is pretty close to right. IBM, which has been doing what's called data processing for the duration and pretty much invented the business, wanted to do a paint job on that so they could sell it in a new way to a new marketplace. So they hired McKinsey, the consulting firm, to do a study that showed that big data is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the world's just filling up with data, and every year it doubles or triples or some big multiple like that. And if you run a business, oh my God, you can't get along without knowing more about this data. But here was the really clever thing that they did. They said, oh, no, we don't want to talk to your CIO or your CTO. We want to talk to your CMO, your Chief Marketing Officer. This person didn't exist 20 years ago. It barely existed 10 years ago. But they said, no, we need to talk to your Chief Marketing Officer because it's really the marketing person who knows what to do with this. And the net effect of this, the PR on this has been so fabulous, then in companies all over the world, budget is being sucked out of IT, out of manufacturing, out of distribution and other places, and going into marketing because companies have this fear that if they don't know everything about you, about their customers, about everything they possibly are doing, they're just so screwed. That's the conceit behind big data. And big data is not good data. And I don't doubt that some good comes out of this. A lot of it probably does. But for marketing, a lot of it just turns into really bad guesswork about you. So, in fact, IBM had 2 years ago, they had an ad that said, actually, they went to their homepage and it said, say hi to the chief executive customer. She's running your company. Does any woman here feel like the chief executive customer of any company? No, nobody does, because we're not. We're just targets. And if you listen to the way they talk, you listen to the way the marketing has been talking, and I was in it for years, I even talked like this for a while. You don't have people out here. You have targets that you acquire and control and manage and lock in. What is that the language of? It's the language of cattle, animal husbandry, and slavery. We talk in marketing about people as if they were slaves. We acquire our customers. And like they're going to obey us in some way. That's one thing. The other is that then a machine can know you better than you know yourself. IBM in that same piece talks about creating, you don't need to talk to your customer. You're going to target her better because you have, there's almost a quote, the million-point portrait of her. You have the perfect portrait. The portrait does not drive a car. The portrait does not operate this thing. The portrait is just an illusion that they have in order to talk to themselves about spending giant amounts of money on big data with big companies. And we are all, in fact, different. Look around this room. No two people look the same. No two people are dressed exactly the same. No two people have the same heart or soul or anything. That is part of human nature as well. We are all different. We're not only different from each other, we're different from how we were 5 or 10 minutes ago. And we eat information, we eat knowledge. We grow by what we learn. to the verb to, the noun information is derived from the verb to inform, which is derived from the verb to form. You know, I was enlarged by listening to Malcolm's talk. He formed me. What we call authority is the right we give other people to author us. We are all authors of each other. This is human nature. We grow constantly by what we're learning from other people and from the world. You can't target that with algorithms. It doesn't work. It's not good enough. And if you say, oh my gosh, well at birth we're going to get everybody's genome and see what they're like. I present the case of the twin boys in Maine in the US. A couple of years ago, there was a story in the Boston Globe about this. A couple of years ago, two 10-year-old boys, one of them announces to the parents, I'm a girl. I'm a girl. And the brother, her twin brother, said, that's right. She's a girl. I'd rather have a sister with this one. They are identical twins, but their souls are different. And the nurture was the same. They're both raised doing the same thing. But one of them said, I'm stepping out of that role. I'm me. I'm this person. I'm not what you thought I was. And the loving response by the parents was, great, let's support that. And let's get guidance from your brother. So we are not so knowable. And this is one of the conceits behind the system. So in marketing as well, there's this, one of the things they talk about. This is a hot thing if you read marketing stuff. They talk about the customer journey. Most customers don't know they're on a journey, but marketers do. They're always on a journey. Right? We're always on this safari to buy more stuff. You open up your browser, damn it, you're on a journey here. Great. You're looking at cars, great, we want to sell you a car. Well, and so they conceive the journey as this circle. You start here, I'm looking for a car, we're having another kid, so we've got two already, we got three, maybe we need a van or an SUV. Or she wants the van, he wants the SUV, we'll argue about it. And we'll look at different things, and he wants the Audi, and she wants the Ford, and comes down. And they finally buy it, and then they own it, and they have trouble with it, and they take it to the garage or the dealer, and then finally they get tired of it, and they dump it, and they get another car. That's the customer journey as marketing sees it. Now, there's a really bright guy named Esteban Kolsky in the US. He's one of the gurus in the customer relationship management business. CRM is a many dozen billion US dollar business with not only IBM in it, but Salesforce and Oracle and Microsoft Dynamics and a bunch of others. And he said, well, let's take that customer journey, that circle, make it like a flexible hula hoop, and we'll turn it into an infinity loop that looks like this. And we'll separate those two. Here's the buy cycle. He calls it the buy cycle. You're going through that buying process, and then you're in the own cycle, which is over here. And the way he presents it there is sort of equal in size, but that's not the way marketing looks at it. It's not the way CRM looks at it. CRM is mostly about selling. Salesforce is called Salesforce, not Serviceforce, right? This is how, when you go on the web, marketing sees you. They see this journey. Here's the buy cycle, and here's the own cycle, right here. Oh, we're just going to scrape that one off on the call center, right? You know, that's we just want to sell more of these things. So the buy cycle is this, and the own cycle is that. Now think about your life. Unless some of you here are actually on Amazon right now, you're not buying anything. Most of our lives are not buying anything, but we own these clothes. We own, in some cases, our cars or our houses. Our lives are, in fact, are full of possessions. To be human is to acquire stuff. We acquire stuff, and we fill our lives with stuff. That's not a bad thing. It's good for the marketplace. It's good to have that. But owning is a very different experience than buying, and there's so much more that can be learned in the owning area by companies. This is, by the way, one of the reasons Apple is as huge as it is. Something goes wrong, you bring it into the store, you talk to the, you know, some guy who's just a dweeb gets called a genius and put behind the bar. That's awesome. He's got this great job, right? You know, and he's going to help you out. But they don't just help you out. They learn from that constantly. That's why they stripped Microsoft's gears and HP and all the rest of these that didn't sell that same direct way. And Steve Jobs didn't want to do that in the first place. A guy named Ron Johnson talked him into it. When he wanted to do the stores, but he never really liked customers very much. He was like Picasso, look at my art, buy my art. you know, that's it. I'm the artist. But Apple adapted, and they're learning constantly. You can't compete again. People pay lots more in order not to have the experience. Everybody in marketing talks about the experience. No, I just want to get my damn thing fixed, right? And that's, you know, that's the heuristics of it, the learnings of it. And there's so much more you can learn on the own side than you can on the buy side. That's why what Malcolm said about customer service, the best customer service all the time. This is not built into most big companies. It doesn't exist at all in Facebook. This is a possibly fatal flaw for Facebook. It's not a fatal flaw for Google, I don't think, because I know people there who say, we want to get into businesses where we're selling direct, like Google Fiber in Kansas City and Provo, Utah, and other places. They're bringing out gigabit fiber all over the US, which is good, and they're following local municipalities in doing that. So in this owning space, we have a public side and we have a private side. And the private side is much more important. And we define what that is. In the physical world, it's very clear what's public and what's private. We would never, a retailer would never walk up to a customer and plant a tracking beacon on them and saying, I'm just trying to give you a better advertising experience. You know, never. That's horrible manners. And protocols, what I described the internet is a big protocol system. That's just manners between computers. Some geeks taught computers manners. And it's the simplest thing, just get that from there to there. But what's happened with big data and with the weird, distorted marketing system we have right now is that the manners are horrible. They're beyond horrible. But they're so normative, they're so standard, they're so embedded right now that it's hard for us to think outside of it. We're like the boiled frogs, or we're like the, you know, the prisoner's dilemma. We've been prisoners of this for so long we can hardly think outside that box. But we can. So I'll give you an example of what ought to be happening here. So if I want to use the internet, this is the internet, right there, and I want to relate to multiple companies. Do I have scale with that? Can I extend my agency that way? Well, I have a browser. Say this is the browser. And I use the browser to, like last week, one of my credit cards got fraud on it. I had to go to 15 different websites to change my credit card. It was a huge pain. Wouldn't it be nice if I could do it in one move? Or if I could change my name or change my address or change my phone number in one move and just tell every company I have a genuine relationship with. If I have a real relationship, I'll say, guys, here's a standard, secure, run by me way of letting you know, here's my new address, here's my new phone number, here's my new credit card. This is doable. But we can't see it as long as we're stuck inside a system called client-server. Client-server is what we used when we set up the web in the first place. It makes complete sense to put most of the responsibility on the server side, and we're just the clients, but that makes us just the targets that can be managed and controlled and the rest of it. And we have to break outside of that. Client-server shouldn't go away, but we need other systems. Other systems where we're in control, and we're the ones that tell them what to do. So in 1998 actually, the internet had been around for several years. I said it started in 1995 in the form we know now. I'd been watching this coming even before it showed up. And I had been, at that time I still was, one of the founders of the top high-tech advertising agency in Silicon Valley. My name was on a building in Palo Alto. And I saw the internet coming, and I saw the internet arrive, and I thought, this is going to utterly and completely change everything because it will empower customers and not just sellers. And when we saw that the early dot-com boom was all about, let's make a mall, let's do everything we were already doing in the physical world online. And we thought that was inadequate. And so, and all of a sudden, all these new startups were calling us eyeballs. We're going to make a site with stickiness so the eyeballs would stick to it. They talk like that, you know. So three other guys and I, Chris Locke, Rick Levine, and David Weinberger, who hardly met ever in the physical world, but knew each other online, got together and we wrote a rant online called the Clue Train Manifesto. And it was a lark. It was just a rant. But what we said was, we called it Clue Train because it was this old Silicon Valley epitaph that said, the Clue Train stopped there 4 times a day for 10 years and they never took delivery. And I mentioned, well, there's this joke about the Clue Train not stopping, and somebody else said, is that domain name taken? And I saw it wasn't. I bought it, and that was all the thought we put into it, actually. And we came up with 95 theses because that worked for Luther, and we called it a manifesto because that worked for Marx. And we put it on the web. And the Wall Street Journal covered it in about 2 days, and it went very viral and huge, and my emails went from like 10 a day to hundreds. And we got a book deal, and we wrote the book over the summer of '99, and in January of 2000, the book came out. Some people joked in time to cause the crash. I don't know if it did or not. If I'd known that, I might have sold some stock, I suppose. I didn't own much, but enough to lose it. Anyway, it then got published in 9 languages, and if you go on Twitter and look up Clue Train or hashtag Clue Train, you'll find it tweeted a number of times a day, and this is 16 years after the website went up. So it struck a chord. It struck a chord. Now, the first thesis of the 95, and most of them are packing material, I can tell you that right now, don't even bother. But the first one, which is maybe the only one that I wrote, said, markets are conversations. And the marketers picked up on that immediately. Yes, markets are conversations. And I'll go to my grave as the guy who kind of foisted that on the world. Whenever you hear a candidate for office saying, join my conversation, that kind of, sort of the ancestor of that was Clue Train and this sort of meme that went wild about everything being a conversation. But the more important thesis came above that, and it wasn't a numbered one, it was one that Chris Locke wrote. And it was just a little graphic that he sent out to the other 3 guys, but that's what energized us. And it said this, if you have only one clue to get this year, 1999, this is it. We are not seats or eyeballs or end users or consumers. We are human beings and our reach exceeds your grasp. Deal with it. That was awesome. Our reach exceeds your grasp. It was explained to me later. I didn't even know this is what we were doing by somebody who reviewed the book that I was on a little TV show with. He said, you guys are marketers. You defected from marketing, and you went over to markets and sided with markets against marketing. I thought, damn it, that's what we did. That's exactly what we did. But the problem with that statement, that our reach exceeds your grasp, our being the first person possessive pronoun, and your being the second person one, is that it wasn't true. The grasp has gone nuts. Google and Facebook and all the rest of them, they could not be more graspy. We could not have less power than we have less power now than we had 15 years ago to affect these companies in many ways. So in 2006, after seeing this not working, and oh, by the way, starting one of the many identity conferences, I was saying yesterday that we've had 20 of these so far. It's hard to move this rock up the hill. But I'm not going to cover identity, but I do want to finish on privacy. I was given a fellowship at the Berkman Center at Harvard, mostly on account of Clue Train and my writing for Linux Journal. And in those days, you were obliged to start a project. And so I thought, I'm going to finish off what Clue Train started, or at least try. So because I knew developers, I knew how developers worked. I'm not a developer myself. The only code I know is Morse, which tells you how old I am. I was a ham radio operator. When you couldn't get girls as a geek, when I was a kid, you became a ham radio operator instead of a computer programmer. Completely useless thing to know now, right? Anyway, so I decided I would start a project that had these purposes: to evangelize the development of tools and services, but especially tools, these things, that made us both independent of the companies that want to control us, but better able to engage with them. How could we fix markets from the customer side? How could we give customers the tools they needed in order to build their own clothing and shelter? How could we give them the clothing and shelter that's already made for them, but works for them and not for those that are spying on them? And the spying even wasn't that bad in 2006. It's a lot worse now. But I've worked at this for now 8 years, evangelizing this stuff in writing, and with a growing group of people. We have 600 and some odd people on our list right now. There are about 200 development projects around the world, the hotbeds. are France. We're the only country I know where the big companies have actually stepped up and said, this is Orange, Carrefour, La Poste, Renault, other companies like that, to say, we actually do want to give data back to the customer. So Orange has already said what Telstra fought in Australia against that reporter, saying, well, we do want to give data back to people. We want to work on that. But France is one, the UK is another, where there's been really positive government support for this, but also a lot of entrepreneurial energy. Really, I can't even count how many companies there are in the UK working on what we call VRM tools. The name of my project, I neglected to mention, is Project VRM. VRM is Vendor Relationship Management. It's the customer side counterpart of Customer Relationship Management, this multi-billion-dollar business. I didn't name it. It showed up, somebody called it that on a podcast I was on, and it stuck, and so I didn't resist it, and so that's what it's called. But there are, like I said, about 200 of these. And the other hotbed besides France and the UK, and to a very kind of diffused way in the US, is New Zealand and Australia, especially Australia. But I want to tip my hat to one here in New Zealand. The last time I was here was to help them think through what they were doing. A company called mywave.me. They have an avatar kind of character called Frank, which works for you in your dealings with the companies of the world. The development for that is mostly happening in Melbourne. A guy there named James Ladd is working on it. He has a team there. In Sydney, there's a company called Flamingo. I'm on their board. There's another one in Canberra called Welcomer. There's another one in Melbourne called GetUp. There's one called Meeco. It's at meeco.me, meeco.me. And they're in Sydney, but the development's going on in Adelaide. And there's another one called OneX's. They're in Perth. I don't know what's in the water down here in general, but it's really encouraging to me that this part of the world, I'm going to Melbourne tomorrow, as a matter of fact, to talk there, that this is going on, but it is very, very early. So I want to tell you about the three things that we're working on with VRM in a general way. And all these companies are different. They're all handling different parts of this. The first thing is data, controlling your own data, and how you selectively disclose it to the world, starting ideally anonymously. If you think about it, most of us are anonymous, which is to say nameless in the world. It is a real inconvenience to know that everything about everybody that's coming toward you. And we don't want to be known that way. Most of us prefer to be anonymous. If any of us know any celebrities, you know that that is a curse of celebrity, that you're too familiar. Everybody's looking at you in the subway. It's weird. And that's not a healthy thing. We don't want to be known. When we want to deal with another party, we have really well-developed protocols for this. We shake hands and say, hi is my name. I'll remind you again later. Maybe I spell it. Maybe I give you a business card. You know, we have this worked out, but online we don't yet. So we need to come up with the tools that allow us to control our own data, to gather our own metadata, to integrate it, to be the points of integration for our own data, and the points of responsibility for how it's used. The second thing is terms. This is really critical. We have had what are called, ever since Industry won the Industrial Revolution, which it did in the early 1800s, check your surname for what some ancestor did in the marketplace and was known as before Industry won. If it's Smith or Tanner or Weber or Weaver or something, that's what some ancestor did in the marketplace. Free agency, having the ability to be known for what you do in the world, was standard until Industry won. And when Industry won, it got scale with many ways, with mass manufacturing and marketing and distribution and many other things, but it also had standard form contracts. Like when you, on your phone, it says, and Apple does this, you know, have you click accept to our 55-page thing you won't read, because if everybody read those things, I've seen research that says you would spend your whole life doing that, because they're so long and they're so complicated and so full of legalese. This is a huge inefficiency in the marketplace. We should be able to set the terms that we deal with others with. It shouldn't be that hard. And there are all kinds of work going on with this, with smart contracts and consent receipts going on all over the world with this. And Customer Commons, this organization, a nonprofit that I helped start, is a client of the Cyber Law Clinic at Harvard that's working on this. They have law students working on the terms that we can assert. So that's the second thing. The first thing is controlling data. The second is terms. The third is intent, being able to express intent in the marketplace. So we have a thing called intent casting. Intent casting is being able to advertise your intent in the marketplace. I want a stroller for twins this afternoon in downtown Wellington. Who's coming through, without revealing anything about ourselves other than the fact that our money is good and we're in the market for that. That's where we are in control of being a qualified lead. So those three things. And we have a thesis as well with Project VRM, which is that a free customer is more valuable than a captive one, and proving that. And it's going to take some work. And I thank you very much for helping with it. Yep.